Getting an early start on the day is not a requirement for a good day of fishing, but it sure does add to the enjoyment getting to see all the colors of an early morning sunrise. In Northeast Florida, we have no lack for great places to fish. The biggest challenge we have is figuring out where to start to fish. Fish can be caught at all stages of the tide. My favorite phase is 2 hours before and 2 hours after the low tide, because this is where the fish are most concentrated. This morning we'll be starting with a high tide. So here is an example of how I get started using a typical creek. 1 marks the spot where the creek intersects the St. Johns River. Be sure and fish the drop-off here. 2 marks the spot of the convergence of several creeks. This is a great place to fish because of all the moving water. Look for eddies, which are slower moving areas of water. This is where the big fish will wait in ambush for the bait fish to be pushed past them. 3 marks the spot where a creek enters the main channel. This is a great place to fish during a dropping tide because all the bait will be flushed out of that creek into the main channel, and that's where the fish will be waiting in ambush. 4 marks a creek bend. When the water is really hot or the water is really cold, these deeper bends will hold more temperate water and the fish will go there for refuge. 5 marks the dead end of a creek. Going to the end of a creek during a rising tide is a good strategy. Fish like redfish will herd bait fish towards the end of the creek, and then when the bait fish get trapped at the end of the creek, it's dinner time. Now that we've identified the spots to fish, let's talk a little bit about the baits that are good to use.
Today we're using a Z-Man Pearl White 3-inch paddle tail on a Strike King chartreuse jig head. Have had real good luck with this. I also have an identical setup on another rod with a different colored body. This is called the Space Guppy. Now, the reason why I do that is usually when you come out, you're going to either have sun or it's going to be overcast or somewhere in between. And usually, depending on how the fish feel that day, one of the colors will work better, either a white or a dark color. The other thing that I do to help out is I put some Procure shrimp scent on the white baits especially. What I'll do, instead of smearing all over, I'll try and imitate like a gill plate and run that up at the top. The other thing, I have nothing to base this on, but I think by putting the scent at the front, if they do strike the front, they're more likely to get the hook. Another thing that you can do, again today I'm really fortunate. There's a lot of bait in the water. So what I'm doing is I'm throwing behind the bait pods because that's usually where the fish will be, unless I can actually see a redfish or a flounder striking along the bank. But if you can't find bait fish, another effective way to cover a lot of ground quickly is to use a different type of lure, and this is a Meridyne. It's one of my favorites. A lot of people inshore use this. I like either the black or the greenback Meridyne. This will cover a lot of water. It doesn't sink very deep. You can use this in like maybe a foot of water. So again, you can cast it out, reel it in, cover a lot of water. Where with the jig, you need to work it a lot slower. The action that you're trying to impart on a jig is more of a snapping action with the rod. Like if you ever seen a shrimp in the water, they swim backwards with the snap of their tail, and that's what you try and do with the jig. So that's a little bit about the lures that we're using today and the techniques and how we're working them.
It's time to catch some fish. Here I'm casting to a point, and a redfish hits it and comes for a short visit. Whenever you can find isolated structure like this oyster bar or a sandbar, make a cast to it and you'll be rewarded. Sometimes you won't see any structure, like here in this open bay, But what did draw my attention to this area was a group of bait fish being hit on by bigger fish. When you see activity like this, approach the bait pod as quietly as you can so you don't scare away the bigger fish. And like any popular fishing spot, more than likely you'll have to share it with other fishermen. Here I made a cast over to the oysters on my right and worked it back towards the boat and was rewarded by a hookup with a nice flounder. I moved down the bank about another 50 feet and made a cast back to the oysters, and this time I hooked up with a nice trout. Here we have a small creek coming into the main channel with oysters on the left-hand side. They all can't be large. Does anybody need a flounder for their aquarium? This redfish took the bait right at the mouth of the creek next to the oysters. Next up, we have a flounder that took the bait next to an oyster bar. Not all the fish you catch will be part of the Inshore Slam Club, but there's still a lot of fun, like this little hard-fighting jack. last fish of the day, a 22-inch trout, was caught right where a creek mouth entered the intercoastal waterway. This happened just as the tide started to come back in and bring the nice clean water with it. Thank you for watching, and please join us for upcoming segments on fishing the North Florida marshes, including the next segment on fishing with live bait. You'll never know what you might miss. Please subscribe to my channel.